Anyway, once again, we have another teaching that I just read that is unique only to John. It's not found in any other gospel. And in it, we have Thomas wanting physical proof, so to believe that Jesus had appeared to the other disciples. Now, one of the things that we talk very much about in the story is that Thomas wanted no more than what all the other disciples already had, which was to have seen the marks. And yet we focus on Thomas. And John's focus on Thomas, I believe, is a precursor for his final, or one of his final teachings in the gospel of his. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. It has been John's intention throughout his entire book that the readers will, through faith, come to know Jesus as God incarnate. And by following Jesus' example, that they will be blessed and that they will find life fulfillment. And so John's unique emphasis on the character of Thomas, in my mind, represents our faithful struggle to be open and vulnerable to a divine power that dashes the boundaries between life and death. I think we can empathize with Thomas's doubt. Thomas was asked to feel inspired without proof in the midst of his anxiety about being caught as a follower of someone that was just crucified. Maybe on a good day, Thomas wouldn't have needed such proof. But circumstances were a bit crazy following the crucifixion, and hence the apostles were all locked in some upper room, hiding away. And again, I think we can empathize with Thomas. An emotional situation such as Thomas was facing comes at us regularly, in my mind. Maybe not as dramatically, but it's regular. Because living responsibly means that we cannot avoid being cognitively challenged to make the best of bad situations all the time. Circumstances are sometimes emotionally disturbing, and we sometimes, if not more than that, find ourselves off our game, so to speak. So as for Thomas, as for us, it is often a challenge to remain faithfully inspired and hopefully optimistic all the time. There is a doubting Thomas in all of us, which is why I believe John's character of Thomas was so well defined, unlike any other gospel. And all too often we say, oh, there's something not quite right about that doubting Thomas, but the truth is, it was all right about doubting Thomas because he represented what is truly human. Our first reading this morning from the letter of Peter speaks about this human journey in relationship to faith. It speaks to the difficulty in remaining faithfully present because of the trials and tribulations that surround us, and it attempts this letter to comfort by offering us a theology that reframes hard times as part and parcel of our journey of faith, referring perhaps to suffering as some form of developmental circumstance. I'll just read a bit of it for you. If now for a little while you have had to suffer various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, being more precious than gold, that though perishable is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Although you have not seen him, you love him. I think in my mind, you can pick up here easily the reference to John's character, Thomas, whether it was intentional or not. Peter goes on to say, and even though you do not see him now, you believe in him. Again, another reference to Thomas, as best as I can see. And rejoice with an indescribable and glorious joy, for you are receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Now, I like Peter. I like what he has to say, and I like his attempts to reframe difficult. However, my problem here, as it is written, is that it's counterintuitive, because it reframes suffering in some measure of God's good grace. And for us to accept this truth, we must rethink our first and natural reaction and find support for some cognitive dance or shift that doesn't always come naturally to try to place our suffering into some positive light. I want to share with you, to an outsider, someone outside the Christian faith, these kind of dances that we do so often appear ridiculous and perhaps even disrespectful. Just as a short sidestep, I'd like to share with you that one of the first things we learn in professional pastoral care is not to reframe someone's suffering as the will of God for their betterment. I think you can imagine someone going into someone's hospital room. Right? The will of God. Have faith. There's something in it for you. Right? You throw your pan. There are a lot of people whose faith in the words of Peter is so exuberant that they feel the need to spread it everywhere at all times. No thought. And I believe that when others are suffering, often all that we can do is to hold faith on behalf of that one suffering, trusting that at some point they will be ready to find God's presence on their own. And we must trust in the miraculous healing power of our quiet and empathetic presence. And I think there's a lesson here too for those of us who are part of that prayer team. I want to share with you that it is not your words of wisdom, but your tender and compassionate presence that makes the difference. But as usual, I did digress a little bit here. So let me get back to John's character, Thomas. Through Thomas, through this character, John says, "Blessed are we when we believe, even though we have not seen." And for me, this means, blessed am I when I can't see the Spirit, but still believe that the Spirit surrounds me and carries me along in its creative, regenerative powers. And for me, this is of utmost importance in my spiritual journey, and this is part one of at least two parts of a sermon on this topic. Because I am so challenged by the anxiety that comes with living in this human body as a spiritual being. So often and so easily, my faithful path swerves dramatically because of circumstance and the fear of the unknown. I wouldn't go there except for I believe that many of us share this to some degree. Often the path of faith takes us down dark alleys and into deep places of pain and grief. And we all, at one time or another, falter and doubt. And demand the presence of God to be made known to us so that we can see it and feel it. We often don't want to go where the Spirit seems to be leading us. I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about is connecting to the Spirit so that we as a parish will be able to find some goals that we can put our money and energy into. The difficulty with doing that is once we kind of have some idea of it, we may not want to do it. Sometimes we arrive in places that trigger a sense that we've done something wrong when we're struggling in faith. In those moments, we spend far too much time, far too much energy trying to figure it out. What have I done wrong? Why am I here in this place? And we punish ourselves in that kind of an exercise, creating our own hell, in my opinion, because we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and so we live with a certain amount of fear. Again, counterintuitive to the Spirit's movement towards peace. Peace through fear. That is indeed something that we must do a cognitive dance to try to understand. I'm reminded of a story, I think I've told it here many times. I wrote an article on it about a railway tunnel that runs through underground in Rockville, Ontario. And as kids, we played inside it, and we made an adventure out of getting to the other end. And the tunnel was extremely dark. You squeeze between a slot in the door, and once you're in it, all you've got is that line of light. You can only go so far, and so you walk till you can't see that light anymore, and then it starts getting damp, and then you're not able to breathe as well. And then suddenly there's something going on inside of you. But you take a few more steps, but we turned always about before we got to the other end. It wasn't really that big of a tunnel. I learned that later in my life. When I had a car, I was able to drive around to the other end. And there was light pouring in cracks on the other side of it too. But you know what? If we would have taken a few more steps, we would have seen that light. And once you see that light, well, then you've got something to go towards, don't you? But until you see it, all you got is dark, damp, unbreathable air. That scares you. When we see the light, it is so much easier to be brave. That's what undergirded Thomas's desire to have Jesus give him more proof. So indeed, blessed are we when we don't see the Spirit at work, yet nonetheless step forward in faith, believing in powers of the Spirit that carry us from darkness into light, always. And blessed are we when our faith is such that in all circumstance we never falter in believing in the presence of Spirit. A presence that will restore our lives over